What would it take to build a more inclusive and diverse working environment within South Africa? South Africa has been at the forefront of developing policies and legislation to protect the rights of the LGBTIQA+ community within the South African working environment. However, too often we still face discrimination, harassment and violence. Stereotyping and safety are one of the major concerns within the LGBTIQA+ community. Today we've got Kyle Smith. He's from a leading corporate institution in South Africa. He's going to chat to us a bit about workplace inclusivity and diversity. So Kyle, why don't you start with telling us your story and your background?
Well, as you mentioned, my name is Kyle. I grew up in Johannesburg, in the southern part of Johannesburg. And yeah, I went to normal schools, government schools. Grew up obviously knowing that I was LGBT. But you only kind of really figure yourself out when you get to your later teens. I joined a large corporate, as you mentioned, from right out of high school. It was a company that I always wanted to work for, and it was like a dream job that I landed. At the time, I think I knew myself, as I said, as an LGBT person, but joining the company, of course, was quite daunting, and I didn't really want people to know about me in the workplace because I didn't know how to be perceived. And yeah, I just kind of continued working there and working my best towards building my corporate career without really focusing on that too much. And later on, I was lucky enough to then be nominated the chairperson of the LGBT Network that then subsequently formed in that company, and we've grown from strength to strength since then, which I think is quite amazing. So from very humble beginnings to quite prolific stuff happening in the corporate environment these days.
So did you, while you were working, while you were working there, did you have to lie about your orientation? If someone asks you, are you bringing a partner to a work function, what did you tend to do?
I wouldn't say I used to lie about it. I think people that I really was quite close with at work used to kind of know. I just didn't talk about it. I tried to avoid the topic. If the topic did come up, I suppose I would maybe avoid. I would just say, oh yeah, I'm not really, dating anyone at the moment, but I wouldn't necessarily give any major details around it. When it came to functions, I used to take girls with me to functions, like ex-school friends and that kind of thing, because I just kind of thought, I'm not sure if I'm ready to bring a male partner to a function. So maybe there was a bit of denial, but it was pretty much, I suppose, because I wasn't really ready in that particular time to come out in the corporate environment, and I didn't know how people would perceive it.
Well, 71 countries still consider LGBT illegal, and South Africa is the only country within the African continent that physically enshrines the rights of LGBT people within its constitution.
Correct.
With this corporate company that you're with, do they provide assistance and help and care for LGBT people working at your company?
Definitely. I think we've embraced it, and this is kind of what I say to people a lot of the time, is you can't embrace LGBT as a brand. It's not a brand exercise. It needs to be something that needs to be wholly lived within the company. It needs to be seen in your policies. It needs to be seen in the way you treat people, when it comes to disciplinary hearings and that kind of thing. And also, it goes further than just policies. You mentioned now the whole thing about LGBT being a criminal act in some countries. Unfortunately, our company does operate in some of these countries where it is a criminal offence, and it becomes quite difficult there. But one of the things that we do to provide support, specifically for people within South Africa that travel to these countries, is we have guidelines and training that basically sensitizes them to what they should or shouldn't do. And it's not about saying don't be authentically yourself. It's about, this is about your safety, and the company worries about your safety at the end of the day. If you're on a business trip, we don't want you to be imprisoned or have any major problems. So things like trans training, if you go to a country that doesn't have rights for LGBT people, never mind trans people, sensitizing them to don't hold hands with the same-sex person in that country. Try not to say things like this. And I think that goes a long way to providing support to people that are just doing their job at the end of the day.
I wanted to ask as well, for instance, you don't have to come out when you're at work. It's not a prerequisite. You don't need to involve your personal life, for the people there. And again, it comes down to a thing of you need to be comfortable with yourself, your environment. If you don't feel physically safe within that environment, you don't have to come out. But how does one deal with derogatory comments, people, hassling LGBT people who are out in corporate?
So, going back to what you said about not everyone being out, and I mean, I know for a fact that there are people that I know are LGBT, but they're not out at work, and I have to respect that because they're obviously just not comfortable. We try and create as comfortable an environment. We say we're not going to tolerate any discrimination, whether it's from your manager or from a peer. When it comes to those kinds of things, I suppose it becomes quite difficult in a corporate because we always mention this. So in induction, as an example, all our new employees go through an induction process, and I actually present to them to say, this is not something that we will tolerate. So if you're going to join this company, you must understand that you can't come to the office and tell a really derogatory gay joke and think that it's going to be funny, because not everyone's going to laugh at that joke. And we take to them, you know, this could be quite a serious thing. If somebody decides to take you to HR and lodge a grievance, we are going to take it seriously. So you need to be very cognizant of that. So we don't try and scare people, but we just try and make them cognizant of the fact that this is not something we would tolerate, and we want to create an inclusive workplace where people can feel like they belong, and they can feel like they don't need to be worried about who they are. They can bring their best self to the workplace. Dealing with it, like I said, you obviously have the HR route, which is the more sort of hectic route, but we try and just say, look, you know, be open with your peers, be open with your manager if you can, and just say, look, I'm actually LGBT, I don't think that's the right word to use, but can I please, you know, just maybe explain to you what would be the correct way? Because I think at the end of the day, sometimes it's also about learning.
Yes.
And
it's always about
heterosexual people don't know a lot about the LGBT world, and vice versa, I would say. So you've got to be conscious of that as well, and maybe just pull them aside and just say, listen, you said this other day, it might have been a bit funny for you, but actually this is the incorrect thing to say. You should rather say this, and you know, but funny joke, whatever, just be a little bit more mindful of that in the future.
I want to ask you, so for us, for example, well, not in the Jaco, but we're not in the corporate industry, you know, so our paths are very different. We have a platform where we get to express ourselves. I'm an entrepreneur. I walk into a corporate environment with saying, I am the brand. So whether you accept it or not, like, this is who I am. Right. So I come with such conviction and confidence, you know, and obviously I don't have to almost adhere to anything in terms of the corporate environment and who I get to deal with. What is that scenario like and that environment like for a corporate when you are actually a part of the community and you're walking into the building? What is that experience like?
You mean for a company that doesn't embrace LGBT, or that does?
Yes, but in general now, you know, so you're heading into the corporate building, for example, so there you are, you start in the corporate industry right now, you know your sexuality. What is it? What is the big fear? Is it the fact that I'm not going to be promoted? Is it the fact that I'm going to be looked away? Where are we at?
Pretty much, yeah. I think a lot of we did a survey in some of our markets, and basically the majority of people said that. They said, we coming as a professional, we have been trained in XYZ, we can bring this skill to this particular company. Why should my sexuality involve, you know, or be in any kind of way involved here? And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people look at it that way. They say, I'm going to join this company and I know that I can bring this, but the only way for me to succeed is to not be myself, because I'm not going to get promoted if I tell them that I'm a lesbian, or if I tell them that actually I have a partner at home and he happens to be the same sex. That is a huge fear, unfortunately. And people from university will say that they often look for companies that do support LGBT rights, because they feel like, I don't want to go and work for a company that I have to feel like I can't be myself and still bring my professionalism and that kind of thing. So that's a huge fear, and I think that is what motivates a lot of younger people to try and work for those particular companies that are seen to be focused on LGBT. If they are not, like you said, they walk in and they think, okay, I've got to be this person at work and I've got to be that person at home, and you've got to be, they always say, if you are going to be somebody who tells lies, maybe not necessarily lies in this case, but you are putting on a face, you have to have a very good memory. And how difficult must it be for someone who goes into a company and every day you go and you've got to remember, what did I say to Susan? What did I say to John? Because if you change your story, they're going to go, but you said that last week. That is extremely difficult. And I think that's the fear that people have. They go and they go, how am I going to tell the story this week about what I did on the weekend without telling them that actually I have a same-sex partner? How do I tell them about the holiday that I went on without revealing potentially my personal life? And I think that's a huge barrier for people when they do walk.
I can only imagine it being a challenge, because obviously as colleagues you want to communicate, you want to chat. How was your weekend? What happened? Oh, I went hiking, you know?
But one thing that people must also remember, and I think not a lot of people, you know, we know about our rights in the Constitution, but there is a specific bill, the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Discrimination Act 4 of 2000, that prevent any discrimination based on sex, gender, orientation, even disabilities and race, just to name a few. And that act was amended in 2005, where they provided training for court personnel, you know, to deal specifically with LGBT cases. So we need to know our rights as well as employees, to know when we go into a company or in a work environment that these are the guidelines, these are the set things, nobody can tell me otherwise.
Yeah. And to go with that, what Shenay said, what does training look like in your corporate environment for all staff?
Well, obviously we've got, I can't mention the name, we've got a university that we promote. It's very much online learning, but we do also have, you know, in-classroom learning, maybe not so much now with COVID, but the training is very, very broad. I mean, it's everything from professional skills right down to, you know, interpersonal type of training, and we have training on diversity, which is all diversity. So you mentioned things like the disability and so on. We take diversity as a, you know, it's women's rights, we say specific needs and not disability, it's LGBT, and the training is very much focused on those particular topics, and they try and bring in real scenarios to say, this is a scenario of John and Susan in the office, and this is not necessarily the correct way to do it, or, you know, in this scenario, this is what should be done or shouldn't be done, and so on.
Just to follow up to that, Kyle, I often worry that, you know, we hear that there's training in corporates and that people are being educated about it, but how often does it happen? Because, or do you just do it once and then trust that, you know, the staff is going to go and do the work on their own? How do you ensure that it's an ongoing conversation in the workplace?
So we basically force our big executives to go on all the diversity training. It's like a compulsory thing. So when you join the company, or even if you have been in the company for a certain amount of time, we determine certain courses are required because it is, you know, going to make, well, hopefully going to make the company do better if these people are able to manage their people better. In terms of follow-up, I suppose it's difficult. The only way we can really follow up is by getting feedback. And we would really hope that by encouraging being open in the workplace, if something does happen, that it gets brought to the attention of either another manager or somebody in the HR department. It becomes difficult because, you know, that's the thing, you kind of have to draw the line between training and doing your actual job. But I think what we do is we say from the onset, before we even hire people in induction, we say that this is something that we take seriously, and if you're going to live by the sort of company code or the company's you know, motto and the mantras, then you have to embrace this, and we will hold you accountable if you don't kind of follow that thing. So we follow through like that, I suppose, and just kind of monitor on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
LGBT rights, we always talk about it, but what LGBT rights do we actually have within a company or in a corporate?
Yeah, in the workplace.
Pretty much the same rights that we should have according to, well, I think working for a
We
big
should
corporate,
have
we
the
should
same
have.
rights. Are we having the same rights?
Yeah, it's different because I think working for a big corporate, you basically have a lot more clout because that corporate stands to lose a lot if you know, put their name in the media and say, oh, I work for this company, and they disrespected the fact that I transitioned or something like that. They stand to lose a lot more than if you work for a smaller company. And I think that is unfortunately where in South Africa, as much as we've got those Bill of Rights and the Constitution, we fall down. And it's very sad because, again, how do you follow up? How do you make sure that those people are actually doing it? It's the same as the smoking law. How do you make sure that people are actually doing the 10 meters outside of the door? It's hard.
But your corporate has recently been on the forefront of implementing a right for LGBT people with as the same as as the same as heterosexual people with regards to taking leave for paternal stuff.
Yeah, so benefits, I think one of the things as the chairperson of the network that I sat down, and again it was education of heterosexual people, and I said to them, we need to look at our policies, and they were like, but what's wrong with our policies? We've got some of the most amazing leave policies. And I said, but they're not as diverse as they could be. And they were like, but explain to us. And then when I explained it to them in the context of LGBT people, they were like, oh, we never thought about that. Like, we didn't think, like, they never thought about like an LGBT person having a surrogate. Or what happens if someone in the company is the surrogate? I mean, you might be friends with your co-worker and they're the surrogate. Now they're going to get 6 months maternity leave and you have to come back to work, but you actually have to look after the child. And based on that, we then changed the policy. It was a bit of time, you know, these things don't always happen overnight in corporates, you know, it's all a lot of red tape. But we now actually have a completely equal maternity and paternity leave. So whether you are heterosexual, homosexual, we offer you 4 months paid maternity or paternity leave. So whether you're the male or the female in the relationship, LGBT, heterosexual, doesn't matter. And we also offer you the ability to sort of phase your approach back to the office with like a half-day working and so on.
Basically like the heterosexual community.
Pretty much, they've been benefiting from for a really, really long time.
You said something very interesting earlier, and I think for our viewers as well, it's very important to know. When you mentioned that as a university student can look and see which companies are community friendly, LGBTIQ plus friendly, how do they do that?
I suppose that goes down to the marketing, and I mentioned before that it's not a brand exercise. There is a brand element to it. If you look at Pride as an example, there are a lot of companies that sort of partner with Pride, and I think the best thing to do is to look at those companies like, and see, okay, not only what is their branding, then go and find out more about them. Maybe say, okay, if this is the company that's partnered with Pride, let me go and speak to one of their HR people, or maybe I must find out somebody who works there who's LGBT preferably, and speak to them and find out what is your experience like.
Because a lot of people just jump onto the bandwagon for the sake of Pride Month, say we are Pride friendly or LGBTQA plus friendly, but when you go look at their structures within their company, there's no systems in place. There's no, I
think we've come a long way. I think the companies that are now partnering with Pride that have got LGBT logos, for the most part, are doing what they say they're doing internally. But it's an exercise, like with anything. If you're going to go and buy a car, you've got to do your research. If you're going to join a company, for a particular reason, you must do your research. And I think that is the same in the LGBT context as well.
If someone is not hired for a job because of their sexuality, what can they do?
I suppose technically you could take them to court because the laws technically say that you're not allowed to be discriminated on, but it becomes very difficult because how can you prove that they didn't hire you because you're LGBT? Because they'll just say, well, we didn't hire you because you didn't have the right credentials. It's a really fine line. It's the same as a pregnant woman. I mean, she might be pregnant and going for an interview, and they're not going to hire because like, she's going to give birth or she's going to be off. So why do we want someone? We need someone to start tomorrow. The discrimination is difficult to prove because they're always going to fight it and say, no, we didn't do this. If you really want to go down that road, obviously take the legal route. It's probably going to be very expensive, unfortunately, and trying to prove it's going to be very difficult. But we do know that we have those rights. So I suppose it's up to the individual at the end of the day. Either you walk away and you say, maybe it wasn't meant for me, or you fight it and use those rights that Shenay mentioned.
I want to touch quickly on SAWE, which is the South African Work Index, which is a platform that corporate companies can fill out a survey, and this company measures like their LGBT inclusivity and how pro-friendly this said company is and whatever. And your corporate company is part of this system. So please just tell us a little bit more about that.
So just got to go back to that question that you posed just now. That's actually a good way. That's a really good way. So if you are looking for a company to join and you really do want to see who is taking it seriously, go and look at the SAWE results, the South African Workplace Equality Index, because that will give you a really good indication of this company is saying this, but they're actually doing it as well. So we participated in South African Workplace Equality Index last year. It was the first time we did it. And it was really interesting because in other countries we have Stonewall. In South Africa we don't really have Stonewall. But they look at it in very much as a South African context. But what I liked about SAWE was it wasn't just please click yes or no. Do you have this? Yes, no, yes, no. It was, if you say you have this, you have to upload evidence of it. So we had to upload policies, we had to upload screenshots, we had to upload emails, basically it was like preparing for a court case almost. You were kind of really getting your evidence and saying, I'm not just saying this, I've actually got something to back it up.
Fantastic.
And participating in that, I think, really allows you to benchmark yourself, because you get essentially your bronze, silver, and your gold award winners. And you can then see amongst your peers who's doing really well, who maybe needs to pick up a little bit. And I think what a lot of the corporates are now doing as part of SAWE is they're looking to each other and going, okay, you know what, we earned a bronze. Not we actually earned silver. But as another corporate, as an example, how do we benefit from somebody who's doing gold? Maybe we should partner and look to see, what are you guys doing? How can we leverage off of that? And I think there have been a few conferences where those corporates are getting together and talking about it and saying, here's a framework for a policy, or this is how you should be doing this. And it's a really good way for those companies to exchange information.
But would you encourage other companies to get on board with this?
Definitely, because it allows you to kind of benchmark yourself amongst those other companies to say, where are we? what do we maybe not, it's not about who's doing what's right and what's wrong, it's about how can we improve
and do more
and make it better. Yes.
But we obviously need more cows in various organizations, you see, in order for us to push through here, because what I'm getting from it all as well is the fact that you could go and sit there. So it's about taking the initiative. So now we're speaking to the guys who are actually in the corporate industry already, to stop sitting there being like, oh, why is the policy not being conducive towards my lifestyle? But to actually become a cow and activate greatness and be like, in fact, if we look at the policy, the heterosexual side is actually benefiting slightly more. Let's balance things out a little bit. But you need to be proactive, is the sense I'm getting as well. So yes, there's an entry in terms of, there's a fear element in terms of your sexuality and not having to expose yourself. But when you are comfortable enough to become the front runner, to look at the policies, to implement the change within the corporate environment, and then just to backtrack there as well, to enter something like this, we're saying, if you are in varsity, we can go onto this website, look at what they are doing, and see the policies and what's being implemented in the corporate industry, so that you can know, okay, this is a safe environment for me as an LGBTQI plus person.
Well, I wanted to close off, but Jodi stole my answer.
I just wanted to tell you, it makes so much sense, because I'm also answering these questions in my head for myself, you know, and obviously in terms of what it's like when you are in the corporate environment, because again, we don't have that, you know, we get to express ourselves all the time, so it's very different. For someone so this idea is to give them the tools in order for them to know, when I'm here, this is what I can do.
Well, on that note, I want to say thank you so much for coming onto the couch for WQMD, and I think it's fair to say that people are working proactively in creating more safer and inclusive spaces for LGBTIQA plus individuals, but we still have quite a long way to go. There's not enough.
We definitely do. And thank you very much for letting me talk a little bit about it. I hope that some other corporates, you know, as you mentioned, maybe there's somebody that's sitting in a corporate going, actually, I could be that person being at the forefront and going and taking this to my HR department and saying, let's do it this way, or let's relook at these things. So if anything, people should maybe take a little bit of inspiration from it and go and fight that fight.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks so much.
So, although many companies are pioneering the way forward in terms of strategy and infrastructure to protect the rights of the LGBTIQA+ community, it is still our responsibility as individuals to know our rights. You need to stand up and talk out against assumptions, bad language, or actions or harassment that happens within your workplace. We are still a long way from being treated equally. However, by one person at a time, we will reach that goal slowly.